You are deserving of happiness. You are deserving of healing. You are deserving of joy.
Whatever your dream is, whatever your passion is, work towards it. And put God first. God has to be in your life.
I wanted to use the skills and the training, hopefully, to advocate on behalf of the community. I'm able to say that on Chop It Up. Be prepared to keep it real.
Hello and welcome to the Chop It Up Podcast, the show that's unfiltered and unapologetic. Each episode will bring you closer to finding your purpose, so be sure to listen all the way through. Now, here's your host, Carmisha Superville.
Welcome back to the Chop It Up Podcast. I am your host, Carmisha Superville, and as you guys know, this is the home of unfiltered conversation with today's most innovative minds. Okay, you guys, so I'm super excited. I am very excited and honored to have this special guest join us today on our podcast conversation. It's going to be an organic conversation, and I know you guys are really going to love it. Today, our special guest is Amy Loughren. She's a health advocate. She's also the founder of the most important patient wellness retreat. She's also a keynote speaker, and her story was most recently featured on the Netflix hit movie, The Good Nurse. This is where I found her, and of course I had to stalk her because I was so intrigued by her story. Amy, welcome to Chop It Up. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for talking with me today. It took a lot for us to get this time solidified. So I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful.
I am so grateful as well. Thank you so much. I hope that this is not the one time we get to speak. I hope that we do have a budding friendship. I just love you so much. And one thing I would say, Amy, what I love about our correspondence, it felt so organic, and I felt like I knew you for a very long time. So thank you for that. So, Amy, let me tell you before we go into the conversation. So it was a Saturday evening. I wasn't feeling my best, but I did have a commitment. I was invited to the launch of a business. And so, of course, I'm one person that if I'm committed to something, I definitely try, of course, within good measure, I try to follow through. So I went to this event, and it was a really nice event, and I left. It was still early, but I didn't want to go out. I just wanted to come home and just go to bed. But of course, that's not me. I said, let me watch a movie. I don't know. So, Amy, I literally opened up my Netflix app and this movie was suggested to me. And I just said, okay, I'll watch it. The Good Nurse. Okay. And Amy, when I tell you, girl, I was like dumbfounded. I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this thing is happening. Like, this actually happens. Maybe I was naive. I don't know. So I just want to say, like, thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for stepping in when you did, And so let's talk about it. What inspired you to tell your story, right? What inspires you to tell your story? And what is the definition of a good nurse?
First off, I was not inspired to tell my story. If anything, I wanted to just bury it and let it go. And when Charles Graeber, who wrote the book, The Good Nurse, sought me out, I was like, okay, I'll tell my story to Charles Graeber. It's going in a book. And now I'm just going to fade away into the background. And then someone read it, who happened to be a huge Hollywood director. And he said, I need to make this into a movie. Not the book, and not about Charles Cullen, who is the serial killer, but he was very moved by the relationship that I had with this serial killer, which was a beautiful friendship. And that's really, really hard to connect with people, to try and tell them the story of how you can be really great friends with someone who is considered to be evil. So I was very against it at first, but then once they got everyone on board and I met with the screenplay writer and I met with the director, I realized they were going to not only be considerate of the families and the victims, but they were going to be considerate of the story that was so nuanced and the story of this friendship that I had that was very complicated with Charles Cullen. And my definition of a good nurse is really someone who genuinely understands that we have opportunities as nurses to change someone's lives multiple times a day. Like the normal person isn't offered those hopeful moments maybe once a day, maybe in a grocery store, maybe, but we are offered multiple times a day during the most vulnerable times in people's existence to make a change that can literally change their life for the rest of their life. And we get those opportunities over and over and over again. So a good nurse is the person who understands the magnitude of that responsibility.
Oh my God. I love it. I love it. And even as you're saying it and defining it, I am thinking of my own recent intervention with the medical industry. I recently had to do an emergency surgery, and I can of course share that. And with my no, it was good. It was good. It was an outpatient surgery, but it was something, Amy, that I've never had to do. I never did before, but it had to be done. I kind of kept pushing it back, and maybe because I was fearful, maybe I didn't know the outcome. Yeah, so I did it, and let me tell you, what you just defined, it is so accurate in terms of even when the folks came in to speak to me. So the prep, the post surgery, the nurse that was there while I was waking up from anesthesia, and everyone, the entire staff, they made me feel so enlightened. And I got to think back, even when you and I were connecting, with the definition of a good nurse, especially when I was so vulnerable. I didn't know if I was coming or going, but the nurses, they were just so graceful. And, yes. And so it made me think about, or it made me prep for this conversation, because I did want to ask about your relationship with the serial killer, Mr. Charles Cullen. From what I saw, I didn't get to read the book yet, but from what I saw, your health was compromised, and he was so empathetic to you in those moments. Talk a little bit about that. Talk about the complexities of that relationship.
So Charlie was a very shy person, and yet this knowledgeable, very technologically intelligent human who also had a sardonic sense of humor. It was just a joy to be around him all the time. He was so calming, and everything that he did, every move that he made seemed very intentional. And I loved that. And I loved how brilliant he was. He just knew so much about medications. And I love brilliant people. Like, I'm just drawn to them because I want to suck in their knowledge. Like, I want to be a part of that. And that's who he was. And he was so quiet. So it was almost like when you were invited into his realm, like there was something very special about that. And there was something very special about being one of his closest friends, because he did share his personal struggles with me as well. It wasn't just us trauma bonding over patients and situations at the hospital. So my relationship with him was very, very close. And it was close to the point where in the movie, for instance, there were things in the movie that they took artistic license with. For instance, in the movie, they did show that he was at my home, and he was actually never at my home. However, the screenplay writer got that right, because I believe that the only way that you can demonstrate to the audience of how close we were was we lived a very long way apart. I was a travel nurse, so he was about 3.5 hours away from me. However, if I had lived closer, we were close enough where I would have allowed him into my inner circle, including being able to have access to my daughters in ways that it was shown in the movie. But we were close in that way that people don't understand, because outside of trauma bonding and regular friendship, you don't understand how easy it is to become close to someone in a way that you would never be close to someone in the outside world, outside of healthcare.
Outside of healthcare. Wow. It's amazing. Now, when you define trauma bonding, are you referring to the workplace environment, or were there trauma, the external trauma from your health as well as his? Just explain that a little bit for the listeners.
Yeah, both. I would say, I mean, if you think about the way that we lived our lives, it was night shift, and we only had really each other and our staff, our coworkers to depend on. If there was a medical emergency, like someone coded a code blue where their heart stopped or they stopped breathing, then you were each other's responsibility, but you were each other's support. So something like that happens, and you're in the middle of a code, and you see the other person as a connection in a way that you can't see regular people. You are trauma bonded. There's a spike in cortisol in your system. You're stressed out, and it's that person that you look to help you figure those moments out. So that type of trauma bonding, but also, yes, my health problems. I was diagnosed with an electrical cardiomyopathy. Excuse me. And I was very sick. And Charles Cullen was one of the only people that knew that I had this heart condition and that I was in such dire straits. And I didn't tell people for a couple of reasons. Number one is that I could lose my job because they could say that I wasn't fit for being able to work. And number two, that I was a contract nurse. So they could end my contract very quickly and very swiftly, and I would lose my health insurance. So I was hiding this. I was diagnosed while I was working at that particular hospital, and Charlie was one of the only people that knew. And I would have issues at work, and it was Charlie who was helping me to make sure that my patients were taken care
of. Complexities of that relationship, right? Ooh, I'm curious. I'm curious. On a sidebar, have you ever dealt with guilt? Have you ever dealt? And of course, if you don't have to share that here, but I'm just curious. Have you dealt? Because it's very complex, you know.
I dealt with so much guilt, and the guilt that I felt not only for not knowing and for not seeing it. In the movie, it's a little bit different. It shows that I somehow became aware through the detectives that while I was working with him, I found out that he was murdering people. But the actual story was he was already fired when I found out that he was murdering people. And when I saw the evidence and understanding that he was doing that right in front of me, I couldn't let that go. I I held on to that for so many years. There was also a lot of guilt about really caring for him. And how do you explain to someone that you truly cared for someone who people consider evil? And caring for someone who was that damaged to the point where he was murdering people, yes, I felt an intense amount of guilt, and a lot of guilt with trying to, I didn't want to explain to people that I still cared for him.
Right, right. Yeah. Wow, amazing. Wow. So Amy, as you're talking, I'm thinking, what are the factors? Because, you know, the medical, we all will have some type of medical engagement at some point in our lives. What are the factors that you would provide us with, maybe 3 or 4 tips as to how can we as individuals, as Americans, how can we be our own patient advocate? And why is it imperative to be your own advocate, essentially, or even for a family member?
Don't be afraid to Google things, and don't be afraid to tell your practitioner that you Googled it and you're concerned about it, because those practitioners see a window of who you are, just a small little Polaroid of who you are. Your history, the way that you live your life, and the experiences that you were having are valid. And if that means that you've Googled something, even if it means that it scared you, don't be afraid to talk to your practitioner. The other thing is that if a practitioner is not listening to you, they're not the right practitioner. They just aren't. And there is going to be someone who wants to make you a team and helping you become healthy. Your diagnosis, it's interesting how people say that the medical profession is a science. I don't say that it's a science. I say that it's becoming a detective, because there's so many ways and so many things that could be presenting itself in different areas of your life. And unless someone is really committed to being a team with you, they're not the right practitioner. The other thing is, have a family member involved. Make sure that you're telling your family member, and especially if you're in a situation where you have to be hospitalized or you need to be put under anesthesia, you need a trusted friend or family member to be there to advocate for you and have those conversations to say, if this thing happens to me, ask this question. Or if this thing happens to me, this is what I want to happen. Because there are so many scenarios that come up and we haven't had those conversations. Have the hard conversations. So those are the 3 things that I would say.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about just my medical history, because I really quick, and I know this is not about me, but as we're sharing,
it is about you too.
Yes. A few years ago, I went to my gynecologist at the time, and I was telling her, Amy, and again, I don't know, I didn't Google everything, but I was telling her that I've been experiencing like these pains, like whenever I have my menstrual cycle, and it's really, really severe, and I feel like it's getting worse. She had said to me, I never forgot her words. She said to me, pain is relative. She said to me, pain is relative. And because I did not know, I didn't challenge her. I left it alone. I just left, and I just continued dealing with the pain, taking pain medication, and just trying to figure out, okay, whenever my menstrual cycle comes along, I'm gonna have to do this. It's only until I was speaking to one of my family members, and she said to me, you gotta go get this checked out. And she was able to provide me with a referral to her gynecologist, and I went. And most recently, when I went, is when I had to obviously have that stay in the at the hospital, because this gynecologist listened. He not only listened, he took the extra steps. Like he walked me through everything. He told me what the issue was and how him and his team was going to help. And let me tell you, Amy, it's been now, what, 2 months? Because I did it back in February. So now we're going into May. And I have been feeling so good, so better. And this has been a pain that I've been dealing with for over 3 years. Over 3 years. So when you spoke about advocating, and oh, Amy, now, oh, I'm Googling everything. Oh, I am Google's best friend. I'm Googling now because now I understand you have to ask those questions. You have to be more assertive with your health. Yeah.
And you know what's interesting when I'm listening to you? You were saying extra steps. Those are the minimum steps. They're the minimum steps. But because in healthcare, we expect so little now because we know no one's going to listen to us. So anyone who does end up listening to us, we think that that's above and beyond. And it's not. That is the bare minimum. Let's investigate what's going on with you. It's been 3 years. This is not okay. Let's investigate this. Let's walk this down the path of trying to investigate what's going on with you. So even you saying that, like, just it gave me chills because it's the bare minimum.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So, let's talk a little bit about how can we prevent another Charles Cullen incident? How can we prevent another serial killer that's also taking care of us in the medical field? How can we prevent something like that from occurring?
The only way that we can prevent that is to support the mental health and mental wellness of all nurses. Charlie Cullen showed signs of serious mental illness, and mental illness that was so deep to the point where he needed to be hospitalized. During that hospitalization, before he was discharged, he was actually called by one of his supervisors to see when he was coming back to work. So he was discharged from the psychiatric institution and went back to work. I believe it was the next day. So the mental health care of nurses is number one. And I'm not saying that if you don't get mental health care, somehow you're going to become a serial killer. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the only way to prevent it is to become mentally and emotionally strong ourselves. Not just to prevent those times when we're not at our best, which can cause errors, but especially shift workers, their brains work differently. And there's been many studies about that, about shift work. But it's also about recognizing when someone else is in crisis and then having the mental stability to be able to do something about that. So the only prevention really is to use preventative medicine, and that's to keep yourself emotionally and mentally healthy.
I love that. Amy, let me ask you, because I know initially you spoke about your health conditions. How are you feeling today? How's everything today with your heart?
I feel fantastic. I'm on a couple of medications now that keep me like very, very good. My heart is great. The experimental surgery that I did have at the Cleveland Clinic back in 2005, I had been told that that was probably a 5-year, maybe 10-year Band-Aid, but it's been since 2005. So we're working up to almost 20 years of that doing well. And I just recently started on some new experimental medications, and they're doing fantastic. I just recently had an appointment and everything looks great.
It's amazing. Congrats to you. And many blessings for more, for another 20 years. You're welcome. So let's speak a little bit about the mental health for the medical practitioners. So you have a retreat, and tell us a little bit about how does that retreat help the medical community? Because I think it's imperative that we also provide those spaces where we can have those conversations.
I think what I was finding is that conferences or even medical retreats, most of them are set up to make us more resilient or to make us more productive or focused on how can we be better for our patients. And what I wasn't seeing is how can we become better for ourselves so that our lives are better? How can we have a space where we have people who listen to us about debriefing everything that we've been through with our cumulative trauma, especially after COVID, but also a space where we feel that there's a sense of community with each other instead of having lateral violence in the workplace where we see bullying or where we're not recognizing that someone is in trouble. So I have put together these retreats and conferences with specialists to not only deal with those particular things, but also to help us think and really connect with our inner abilities, which means even talking to people that are mediums, psychics, tarot card readers, people that are Akashic readers, the energy healers, Reiki, acupuncturists, meditation specialists, and debriefing specialists to bring us to a point where there is a holistic approach, because it's not just going to therapy. It's about finding ways that may not be the traditional ways of listening to our inner voice. And so I've put all of that together with these specialists so that you can have an immersive experience where you can then sample these different specialties and these different modalities to see if it perhaps sparks something in your own healing journey.
Wow, that's amazing. What has been the feedback? Have you been able to get any testimonies?
So far, the feedback has been pretty exceptional, and people are super excited about it. We're actually having our inaugural event in October, and that is in Savannah, Georgia, and it's between the dates of October 17th through the 20th. So it's a 3-night conference. And there's everything from having your cards read to having energy healers there to being able to have one-on-one experiences with debriefing specialists. And also every night before bed, there is an opportunity to have sound healing so that you can go to meditation practices. There's morning yoga. I mean, it is a packed breakout sessions with workshops to learn how to be more mentally healthy, not to become better nurses, but so that you can feel better about yourself.
I love that. That's amazing. Well, make sure you send me an invitation.
You would love it.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I actually did sound therapy a few years ago. It's very moving. It's very moving, and you do become one with yourself. So that's amazing. Yeah. Awesome. So you know what? Let's segue into policies and procedures. But really quick, are you still practicing as a nurse?
So I do private duty now, and I will do home health, but I haven't been at the bedside since 2020. 2021,
Oh, wow.
I believe.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Not since, not, it must have been 2020 because of COVID.
Gotcha. All right. Any reason why you left or any reason why you kind of pivoted?
So I was actually in charge of the code team at a very large hospital. And during that time, COVID had hit. So let's say it was 2019, COVID hit. And it just became really bad to the point where they took us off the code team. There was no longer a code team, and it was only an ICU for COVID patients. And it was very early on. And during that time, they would not allow nurses to have N95 masks. We were only allowed to have the surgical masks. And I was instructed to tell the nurses that if they did not want to work just with the surgical masks and without an N95, then I was to just send them home. And that same night, a doctor showed up on the unit. We're all just wearing the regular flimsy surgical masks. And that night, a doctor showed up with an N100, which looks like an N95 with big respirators on the side. And the hospital had made sure that every single physician had an N100, and we were not even allowed to have N95s. So I realized this is not going to end well for me. This is not going to go well. So I actually, which is very interesting, but after that, I went home. I was distraught about all of this because I was in charge of that unit, in charge of the COVID unit. And during that time, I had 3 horses. I went out to throw some hay over the fence to my horses, and I actually fell and broke my arm. So I ended up being out for 3 months during that time, during COVID. So during like the real height of COVID, I was out with my broken arm, and I decided to do something different because going back to the bedside just did not feel good for me. And I ended up doing home health, where I was in charge of private duty. So there I was in charge of nurses and home health care aides that went out into the homes, and those were mostly people that were coming home from their stay in the hospital from COVID.
Got it. Okay. That's so, wow.
What a story, right?
What a story. Oh my goodness. I tell you, when you hear these stories, you really think about the healthcare system and how much work that needs to be done, which leads me to this question about policies and procedures. What policies and procedures are needed to take place in healthcare organizations to prevent employees from patients being harmed, or these scenarios that you just mentioned? What type of policies and procedures are needed to be more empathetic to the employees, right? And also to protect the patients? If you can answer any of that, what could be implemented, maybe even on a legislative level? What do you suggest?
It's interesting that you say that, but we can't even get the basic needs of people through the administrative level, the basic needs. And even if you're talking politically, they're not concerned about this. And most hospitals are not there to take care of patients. Most hospitals are there to make money. I don't believe that in our lifetime, we are going to see anything except this capitalistic society that is making money off of patients. I don't see this changing. I don't think that we even have the capacity to make policies or procedures to make people safer, because we are only focused on money as far as the healthcare system. I wish that it was different. I wish that I had better answers, but I don't see that changing. And for someone to be able to make those changes, they would have to make those changes politically. And I don't think that nurses themselves are strong enough yet, because we are still seen as labor rather than professionals. I think maybe if physicians took a stand, that there may be a change. Even though nurses have the numbers, they don't have the voice. They just don't. And it may be a pessimistic outlook, but the best way to support patients is to be very, very aware of your own moral stability, your own moral and mental health stability, taking care of yourself so that we can better ourselves while we're there, so that we can be strong enough to speak up. That's the most important thing. It's internal work. I don't think that the external work is going to be able to take any, I don't think there's any footing yet. I just don't.
Wow. Man, I'm feeling kind of like, oof.
I know. It's very
it's a tough
sad.
pill to swallow.
It is.
Wow. So what do you suggest in terms of, because I speak to, from time to time, I speak to different nurses here in New York, and there is a consensus of the feeling of being burnt out. And obviously after COVID, you had mentioned that as well. What do you suggest to counteract? Because we do need our nurses. So what do you suggest to counteract? Maybe a nurse that's listening now that's feeling burnt out, that's feeling like I need to just pivot out of the industry. Like, what do you suggest outside of the mental health that you spoke about? What else can, our nurses do, and how can we as the public support them?
Pivoting out of the industry, there's so many nurses that feel trapped, not just by the fact that that's the only thing that they know, and they know that they can make money. But I mean, nursing can be lucrative if you are working shift work, and perhaps you're bettering yourself in going to school, but you're still going to end up making that money at the bedside. There are many other ways to make money. It's just very hard for us to think outside of the box. And I think that being in upper level management tends to pull from your moral responsibility. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest that. However, if that's where you're headed, just hold on to your own morals so that you can feel like you're doing the right thing all of the time. But pivoting out of the industry, I think that there's many ways that you can do that, but a lot of them involve using your degree to do something different. And me personally, I feel like going into business, or going into legal nurse specialists, or going into types of consulting that don't involve bedside nursing. Or at least just take a break. Take a break from bedside. Do something. There's so many things that you can do in nursing. You can also go to hospice. You can go to remote work where you're being a triage specialist that is just on the phone. But really it is about understanding that this is not just who we are. Nurses it is your profession, but it's not who you are. If you can make it through nursing school and you can be at the bedside with these patients, you can do anything that you put your mind to. think about business, think about the service industry, go into perhaps massage therapy or even speech therapy, physical therapy, something where you are not expected to do things that may be just not in line with who you are morally.
I love that. I love that. Wow. Amy, I can have you here all day, but I know you're a busy lady. So I am not, but I want to thank you so much. Oh my God. This has been a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for sharing space. Thank you for sharing space with us. So as we leave off, as we close off this amazing conversation, I wanted to ask about what is next for Amy? What is next for you? And what can you leave us, the listeners? What advice can you leave us with the story, with your story, right? What advice can you leave us with? And yeah.
What's next for me are these conferences. I am dedicating now all of my time to helping the mental health and mental stability and giving nurses opportunities to tell their stories. That is my main focus right now. And advice, I just believe that nurses themselves, as they are moving forward in their lives, and not just nurses, but everyone, is to focus in on themselves, focus in on who they are as a human, focus in on meditating, doing breathing exercises, and really focusing on what do we want for ourselves, making peace and happiness our first choices in life, and not seeking something that will then bring us happiness and peacefulness.
I love that. I love that. Ashe. Beautiful, beautiful. Really quick, what did Jessica Chastain, did she portray you in the best light? Were you happy with the portrayal?
Her portrayal just made me remind myself that I am a gentle being that is worthy of being loved. And watching her on the screen as the character of Amy, I fell in love with the character of Amy, and that helped me fall in love with the real Amy.
I love that. I love that. Beautiful. And I agree. I concur. I definitely agree. She did a fabulous job. Amy Loughren, wealth advocate. Well, I should say health advocate.
It should be wealth advocate.
Yeah, definitely. I'm speaking into the
I'm okay with that.
Health advocate, founder of the most important patient wellness retreat, keynote speaker, an amazing mom. Of course, how are the girls?
They're so good. They're so good. We see each other at least once a week.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much, my friend. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for your time. I'm just so excited for your next chapter. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, you guys, thank you so much for listening to the Chop It Up podcast. It's been an honor. As you guys know, please continue to like, subscribe, and please, you guys, share this amazing episode. We'll see you on the next episode. Bye, you guys.